Hello, and welcome to live programming here at the More Freedom Foundation. Today, we're going to be discussing what looks like a growing civil war in Ethiopia. The title of today's presentation is How Worried Ethiopia? How worried should we be? And the answer is we should be very worried. Before we get into it, just some preliminary stuff here. If this is your first time here, you'll notice that there's me, I'm talking, and then there is a live chat. We encourage folks to participate in the live chat and participate vigorously. You're allowed to be as abusive of me and my ideas as you want to be. I'm also quite sure that I'm going to get a lot of stuff wrong here. I mean, Ethiopia is a country that I've spent a lot of time researching over the past week, but it is not a place that I consider myself anything like an expert in. So yeah, tell me when I'm wrong. Tell me when I look stupid. Tell me you don't like my beard. Go for it. We also have a pretty open policy towards what you can say. You want to be racist, you want to whatever. I mean, they're pretty open. We're not very politically correct here. It's pretty open. We have a hard and fast rule, however. You are not allowed to be abusive to other people in the chat. And that also means that you can't really, just disrupt the chat either. You can't disrupt it. You can't be abusive to other folks. Logo Cool Extreme, who is already commenting in the stream, is here to moderate. So listen to what Loga says. There is no court of appeal other than Loga. If he tells you you're stepping out of line, listen to him, because the second time he has to tell you, he won't tell you a second time. He'll just block you. So say whatever you want about the ideas I'm expressing here. Please, I'm sure I'm going to get a ton wrong. Call me out for it. Call me an asshole, what have you. Go for it. But do not be abusive to each other and do not disrupt the chat. So the way this works is I've got a presentation I've put together. Sometimes it takes a half hour, sometimes it takes a full hour. Today, I don't know, I feel like it might be a longer one, but it might not, who knows? It depends on how that goes. And then the second half of this is Q&A, and I will do Q&A. I'll answer people's questions until, probably almost certainly until 2 p.m. if the internet doesn't go out or I don't need to go to the bathroom or something. If you have any questions for me, I'm not going to be able to see it while I'm doing the presentation. Ask those questions at the end. And yes, the Q&A is not just on Ethiopia, it's on whatever you want it to be about. If you're going to do super chats, I like super chats. I will definitely answer your question. If not, I'll try to answer the questions that come up. I would also ask that you hold off on the super chats until after the presentation, because I really want to respond to super chats and I don't want to miss any of them. For those who don't know, super chats, it's a way through YouTube where you can send me money, which I appreciate. Anyway, let's get into it. Ethiopia is a huge country. This is why we absolutely should be worried about Ethiopia. It is a large, powerful, important, economically significant country. I emphasize again, large. It is the second biggest country in Africa. I didn't look at the rankings in terms of the geographical size of it, but by population, it is the second largest country in Africa. Estimates vary between 100 and 110 million people. This place is huge, and the prospect of a place the size of Ethiopia, no matter where it was, falling into civil war is horrifying. It's terrifying. It's always something that we should be concerned about. And it looks like since November 4th, that is what is happening in Ethiopia. To emphasize just how significant this place is, it is an ally of the United States. It's sort of recognized to be a sort of linchpin of security in the region. Ethiopia is landlocked. It is surrounded by a number of African countries and is also very close. There's Djibouti and Eritrea and Somalia in the way, but it is very close to the tremendously significant strait between Africa and the Middle East. So, You've got countries like Yemen, Saudi Arabia in the region. It neighbors directly on Sudan, a country that this channel means to do a lot more with, and it is in the midst of a conflict with Egypt. It is a very not a physical conflict, but a diplomatic conflict with Egypt over a dam. It's a big deal, and it's also been a very hopeful place for quite some time, which is very distinct from Ethiopia's international reputation when I was a kid. So yes, this is absolutely something that we should care about. Another aspect of this is sort of this isn't really a particularly moral or sort of solidarity-wise way of looking at it, but I think what's interesting and what people should be aware of, if Ethiopia really does fall apart, the extent to which it fell apart in the 80s is debatable, but in the 80s they had serious, horrific problems, aftermaths of wars, poor management, and famine. That is how Ethiopia first came to my attention as a kid in the 1980s. We'd hear about famine and death and starvation in Ethiopia. In the 1980s, Ethiopia was a extraordinarily poor country. There's an interesting dynamic where in Ethiopia, still GDP per capita is still very low, around $750, according to the World Bank. But it is a much richer country than it was back in the 80s, the last time it sort of fell into chaos. And one of the interesting things about being somewhat richer is that it actually makes it easier for people to have the resources to become migrants. So if this country of 110 million people fell into chaos, we would have a large middle class, a large deeply impoverished class. I mean, the refugee crisis in a country of 110 million would dwarf anything we'd seen from Syria. Of course, unlike Syria, it's not directly on Europe's border, but it would lead to great horror. So another thing to speak to is the status of Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed. He came to power in April of 2018, and as a video linked in the description of this live stream shows, he instantly engendered a ton of enthusiasm. Everybody in the world was very excited because he came to power. The EPRDF that had ruled the country for the most of the 3 decades prior to 2018, was quite authoritarian. It had political prisoners. It refused. There was no free media. Prime Minister Abiy opened things up, called for renewed free elections, set political prisoners free, welcomed back exiles. Crucially, he settled a long conflict with Eritrea, Ethiopia's neighbor to the north, for which he garnered a Nobel Peace Prize. This is a very impressive individual. And what we're seeing set in right now, because on November 4th, it's debatable. The Ethiopian government has what they claim to be a casus belli, a reason why they've sort of decided to crack down on the Tigray region. But it seems people are pretty skeptical whether the Tigrayan government really did attack the military base the way the Ethiopian government has claimed. So there's like this sort of real disillusion setting in, like, oh my gosh, Abiy Ahmed, he got the Nobel Peace Prize, and now he's doing a civil war. And I think that's honestly a little dumb on all of our parts. That's certainly when I started researching this intensively about 3 or 4 days ago. That was probably my mindset, because I did this produced video where I'm like, oh, Abiy Ahmed, he's amazing. Look at all these great things he's doing. And now it's like, oh wait, this is a guy in a uniform, crushing people in his country. By the way, the story is much more complicated than that, and I will get into that. But I think I do want to mention like this sort of mindset, this idea that like, oh, now Abiy Ahmed, he was a good guy. Now we're going to see him as a bad guy. It's very similar to the way I can never pronounce her name, but the woman who is now in a leadership position in Myanmar, who was a Nobel Peace Prize winner and under house arrest from a regime, and she was feted everywhere. And now, of course, she's Now that she's in government, she's in the position of having to explain away what is probably a genocide, and now everyone hates her now. That's not a dynamic that's healthy or that makes any sense. What we have to recognize from our poorly educated about the facts of life in these countries, we have to recognize that it's not a place where you can just go and be good or just go and be bad. It's trying to run Ethiopia is an extraordinarily complicated thing. Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed is a very competent guy who's doing extraordinarily risky things that may or may not be necessary to keep his country going. But this idea that now he's bad, I think is tremendously oversimplified. And I think this is sort of a central message of this presentation today is yes, we should be very worried about what's happening in Somalia right now, but we should have been very worried about what had been happening in Somalia for 3 to 5 years at least, because the tensions are real, the tensions are growing, and it is a place that is in the midst of a massive transition. Even though it's becoming more wealthy, it is in the midst of a transition. Notice a super chat from Nikhil Attar. Thank you so much for that super chat, and more live streams, please. I think I may actually anyway, I'll talk about it at the end, but I think I might do a whole bunch of live streams in 1 week in December. We'll talk about that at the end. Anyway, so central point, looking at what has been going on both right now and historically in Ethiopia, there's a way that people talk about Ethiopian problems and African problems more generally that pisses me off. I think you can see this even in the New York Times, though it's more carefully couched, but you can see it on Twitter or in less serious publications. Well, sadly, not a lot of less serious publications are even talking about Ethiopia much. But it's this general idea that, well, Ethiopia is getting richer, and now that they're rich, they're getting super into tribalism. It's these tribes that are da-da-da. And it's honestly, researching this for the past 3 or 4 days, this isn't some alien uncivilized African problem that's going on here. Nobody would actually say that in the US press, but I think that's definitely the subtext. What this is a centralization versus federalization problem. This is one of the problems that you see throughout history in every country in the world. It is, to what degree is it smart? To what degree does it make sense? To what degree politically can we centralize this country versus and can we do that and weigh that against the sort of freedom and self-determination of the component peoples of this country or political entity? This is an issue everywhere. If you look at the news in Europe, supposedly this endlessly civilized thing, it's the same dynamic. The big news this week is that Bulgaria apparently has blocked Macedonia's attempt to begin the accession process for the EU. That's the same dynamic that we're seeing in the Ethiopian civil war. It's some peripheral group within the EU doesn't want the central EU thing to do something that it wants to do. And I haven't researched that issue. I can't tell you who's right or wrong, but it's the same dynamic. In this final year of the Trump presidency, it's been a huge dynamic in U.S. politics. Donald Trump loves to talk about blue states and those evil blue states and those evil blue cities and their bad democratic manager. It's all federalism, or trying to figure out what balance between regional power and what the balance between regional power and central power should be. It's the central concern of the U.S. Constitution. It is the central concern of every country everywhere. Are there ethnic aspects to this conflict in Ethiopia that get horrifically violent in ways that they don't currently get in the United States and Europe? Absolutely. That is an aspect of poverty. There are many reasons why that is the case. That is something that is the case in Ethiopia. But I think we're not talking about some kind of, you know, tribalism here, or some kind of, like, primitive thing. We're talking about very real constitutional disputes. The Tigrayan group, the TPLF. There's a lot of acronyms in this. The TPLF, the group that is being attacked by the Central Ethiopian government right now, has a different interpretation of the constitutional governing documents of Ethiopia than the central government does. The TPLF might actually have a more accurate reading of what that constitution says. I can't speak to that, but it's entirely possible. This is not some, primitive machete thing going on. This is real disputes about real aspects of law and constitution that are vital for Ethiopia's future. And as I looked into this, it sort of realized this central power versus regional power has been a dynamic throughout Ethiopia's modern history. And I want to talk about that a bit, because I think we can't really understand this conflict between the central Ethiopian government and the TPLF in the Tigray region. That's the TPLF stands for Tigrayan People's Liberation Front. The TPLF, we can't understand that without really sort of stepping backward and looking at the context of Ethiopian history. Now, Ethiopia is one of the oldest hard to say this, it is a place that Ethiopia, or Abyssinia, is a place that has at least existed certainly in European myth and legend for millennia. It is a place where aspects of Ethiopia turned Christian long before most of Europe turned Christian. There's a tremendous wealth of history and depth and content to Ethiopian history. I'm not going to deal with any of that because that would get very complicated and that would be a very long presentation. But what's I think interesting for our purposes is how the modern state of Ethiopia came about. There is this incredible depth of history in Ethiopia, but what Ethiopia was in any given century, and there has been in Ethiopia or something like it for 2 millennia. It's like I said, extraordinarily long history, but the way that the modern Ethiopia became constituted as it is, territorially speaking, is very much wrapped up with the 19th century and the sort of legacy of imperialism. Ethiopia famously was one of the few countries in the world that managed to successfully resist European colonialism. And looking at how Ethiopia was sort of put together, what strikes me as what I'm seeing here is actually kind of an anti-imperial empire. It's almost like Ethiopia, specifically, I believe, generally more Amhara elements of the peoples that make up modern Ethiopia, managed to build, I could be completely wrong about that, managed to build a larger Ethiopian empire that had the resources necessary to resist European empire. The Ethiopians famously, I think it was 1896, I may be wrong about that, famously beat the shit out of the Italians who tried to come in and take over Ethiopia. And the Ethiopians slaughtered them. They beat the crap out of them. Like I said, one of the only. Yeah, I mean, Thailand managed to say independent. Turkey, Ethiopia, there are many. So Ethiopia beat the crap out of Italy, became recognized. I believe, gosh, really should have written down the name of the late 19th century Ethiopian emperor who consolidated, Menelik II, sort of consolidated more or less modern territorial Ethiopia. I'm not going to get into the nuances of Eritrea, which is an independent country and fought to be so. But so this was sort of established as an anti-imperial empire, and very successfully so. I believe Ethiopia was a member of the League of Nations, which I believe it was one of the only African countries that was. This League of Nations is the predecessor to the United Nations between World War I and World War II. I believe the League of Nations one of the things that led to its end was the fact that the Italian dictator Mussolini did successfully capture Ethiopia. But it was only for a period of time. I believe it was 5 or 6 years, nowhere near the sort of the periods of imperial subjugation that other countries were subject to. Haile Selassie, one of the sort of successors, became tremendously famous for that, world famous for that independence that Ethiopia always held onto. It's tremendously culturally significant. I believe there's a religion based on him, and he was in power for a very, very long time. I think there's something interesting. He was a regent first, but more or less, the guy was in charge of Ethiopia from 1916 till 1974, still leading into his 80s. But what's interesting about Haile Selassie is sort of the empire that he built sort of managed to defeat him in a way, and you have this exact conflict between regional powers and centralization, which is often sort of a modernizing centralization that you see in other eras of Ethiopian modern history. My understanding is that he had tremendous difficulty modernizing the country in the face of the sort of hereditary nobility, not just hereditary, but also sort of service-based nobility that ran the country. So he would try to bring the country in the future and was successful in many respects, of course, but also failed in other respects because of resistance from other power centers in the country. And that actually ended up that failure to truly develop and enrich the country, and the failure of continuing to indulge this aristocracy led to his fall after the oil crisis in 1974. And unfortunately, Selassie, I didn't really realize this. It's now established he was murdered by the folks that overthrew him. The group that overthrew this ancient empire, well, perhaps not as ancient as build. The group was the Derg, which I think sounds as a council or something in one of Ethiopia's many languages, run by Mengistu. And that was between 1974 and 1991. And I think the consensus is that was a pretty horrible time for Ethiopia. Keep in mind, I'm coming from the US context where obviously, the Derg and Mengistu, they were Soviet clients. So obviously in the United States, my sense is that everything was the Derg's fault. These communists, they ruined the country, but it had something to do with the invasion of the country by Somalia. Yes, that's Somalia that the U.S. helped pay for, but that's neither here nor there. So yeah, it's a really tragic time for Ethiopia. I think this is the government that saw the mass starvation that anybody who was a kid in the 80s remembers seeing on their television. And that region, that I think it's interesting. I couldn't find support for this, but I do wonder that actually the degree to which this communist dictatorship was successful in sort of wiping out that old aristocracy that had run the country. Anyway, Mengistu was very dependent on Soviet sponsorship. So in 1991, when that sponsorship disappeared, he became very shaky. And what he lost power to was, again, a rebellion of the regions. It was the regional powers that teamed up to take down Mengistu. And they formed something called the EPRDF. So I think at this point, it makes sense to talk about the incredible complexity of Ethiopia. I mean, this was an empire that was built to fight empires. And I think one of the definitions of empire that is common is differing groups, linguistic, cultural, religious, sort of put together into a larger imperial state. And that is exactly what Ethiopia was, what it was throughout the 20th century and remains today. It is staggeringly diverse. There are large Christian populations, as I said, going back almost 2,000 years, and large Muslim populations. Didn't check this out, but I'm confident there are other religions represented as well. Um, and the largest group, the largest single group of ethnicities are the Oromo group. Abiy Ahmed, the prime minister, is a member of the Oromo group, which is interesting because, as far as I can see, this is the first time since at least the 19th century that an Oromo, you know what, I didn't double check that. I don't know if perhaps Ahmed's direct predecessor was Oromo. And Oromo actually ran the country, which is tremendously significant. But it's Oromo, like 30%, 34% Amhara, 27%. I don't know the extent to which is true, but I think the understanding is that the Amhara were sort of the base group of the Ethiopian empire that was built by Menelik II and led by Haile Selassie. Then you've got Somalis, which are 6%. Sort of they occupy a lot of Somalia's, a lot of Ethiopia's landmass is, sort of Somali territory, which was the root of the Somali-Ethiopian War. It was in the 70s or the 80s. But again, it was something that comes up a lot when we discuss things here. It looks like the Somali territory is mostly desert. So the Somalis only make up 6%. And behind that is the Tigrayans, which make up 6% of the population of Ethiopia. So what's very interesting about the EPRDF, and it's a tremendously complicated thing that everyone seems to have a different interpretation of. So the TPLF, this is the group that today's Ethiopian government is fighting against. This is where the civil war has come from. Is the Ethiopian central government under Abiy Ahmed is fighting against the Tigrayan People's Liberation Front, the TPLF, in their Tigrayan province, up in the north of the country, right over the border from Eritrea. The TPLF, according to the New York Times, the way the New York Times says it is basically the TPLF ran the country for the 30 years between the fall of the Derg and the Derg fell before Mengistu. The fall of Mengistu in 1991 until 2018. The TPLF ran the country. That's sort of what the New York Times is saying, but it's a little more complicated than that. Unquestionably, the TPLF, these are the folks that the current Ethiopian government is attacking, were the main force in the group that overthrew Mengistu. But they acknowledged from the beginning that they were not, with this base in the north of the country and only 6% of the country's population, they were not going to be able to just outright rule the country. So they were careful from the beginning to present a collaborative front. And that was the EPRDF. This is the sort of that acronym is the name of the system that ruled Ethiopia from 1991 until really the end of 2019. Abiy Ahmed came to power as sort of the last leader of the EPRDF, which is confusing because Abiy Ahmed is an Oromo, not a Tigrayan. So what I think, my sense of what happened was a process of evolution. In 1991 and through 2012, until the death of Meles Zenawi, who was the Tigrayan sort of big guy in charge, I don't like to use that terminology, but was the leader of Ethiopia from 1991 until his death in 2012, a Tigrayan, also a member of the TPLF. Yes, the Tigrayans were very much in control of Ethiopia. However, it was always consciously with allies from other groups. The extent to which that was sort of a illegitimate co-opting or a legitimate partnership is infinitely debatable. I think the New York Times' approach of just saying de facto, like, well, the Tigrayans ran the country for 30 years and now they're whining. Which was really the vibe that I got from one of the New York Times articles, doesn't make a ton of sense to me. So the EPRDF, what I could see is that and please someone correct me in the comments, that the EPRDF sort of evolved over the course of the 30 years running the country, bringing in more ethnicities just to keep themselves going. And what's very interesting, and this is where the TPLF, the I guess you'd have to call them, formerly the leading group, and as of today, or I guess as of November 4th, now a rebel group again. Um, this is where you can say that they actually might have the correct interpretation of the Constitution, but it's a very difficult thing to say. So in 1991, when the EPRDF kicked out the Derg and established themselves, they established a sort of constitutional order where Ethiopia's many sort of different groups, different regions and subregions had a lot of power. It was a devolved system, a federal system where the individual states had a tremendous amount of power. I think there were 9 sort of larger regions and then subregions within it. It's a very consciously, a very devolved system. But what's interesting about this, and the EPRDF was, I think, diplomatically very skilled. I want to read more about Meles Zenawi now, because it was, sort of in a sweet spot diplomatically. They worked with Bush during the War on Terror. Ethiopia basically invaded Somalia for George W. Bush. Well, at the same time, they were very good at catering to the Chinese and arguing that they had sort of a Chinese developmental model, which is, I think, fairly easy to sell, because what's going on here is a system that we see, I think, a lot in communist countries. And the TPLF, when it was founded back in the 70s, even before the Derg came to power, it was very much a communist organization, though, after the 1990s, it sort of stopped mentioning that so much. But I think that the way that Ethiopia was organized was in a way that struck me as kind of communist, because you have this very federated, very devolved looking constitutional order where all the regions have extensive powers and can make their own decisions. But then you've got a party, you've got an authoritarian party that is in the middle, sort of sitting in the middle. So it's not really the government that has power, it's the party that has power. And I think that's the system that Ethiopia had until, I think, the end of 2019. That's the system that Abiy Ahmed was able to move up through to become prime minister in April of 2018. So that's, I think, that the central tension here is that Ethiopia is a place that is meant to be run by an authoritarian party, at least the way that it's currently constitutionally organized. That authoritarian party consciously has been taken away. So now you've got a constitution and a way of looking at things that is super federated and does run the risk of falling apart into scattered, independent, tiny regions. I don't think there are many, I'm sure there are actors in every region. There are political actors in every region who are calling for such a complete dissolution. But I think many Ethiopians, and I think even many folks in those parties, if not most folks in the leading parties in these regions, recognize that Ethiopia is much stronger together. I would hope that they realize that. So it's an incredible tension, and it's an incredible mess. I think this mess was already starting long before Abiy Ahmed was in power. This is an aspect of Ethiopia becoming more wealthy. And wealthy dramatically overstates it. Still, it's got a GDP per capita of like $750 a year. It's probably much higher, according to PPP measurements. But this place was much richer than it was before. People were getting more invested in their sort of regional nationalisms and ideas of who should control what, where power should appropriately be. And the reason Abiy Ahmed was created as a prime minister by the old EPRDF system was because it was already falling apart. It was already low on legitimacy. And one of the main reasons, by no means the only reason, that EPRDF system was falling apart was because the Oromo, at 34%, I guess it's a plurality. They are the largest, not a majority, but they are at 34%. The Oromo make the largest ethnic group in Ethiopia. The Oromo had a large-scale protest movement, and the EPRDF was killing people in large numbers, and it was not looking good. And that is the reason that the EPRDF, that's the reason why the guy before Abiy Ahmed resigned, and the reason why the EPRDF thought it was sensible to vote in an Oromo politician. Abiy Ahmed had a history in the military, history as a politician. I don't believe he was technically a member of the TPLF. I didn't see that anywhere in his history. So he would have risen up through the Oromo parties. I failed to mention that the EPRDF, the party, formally, part of its formal structure is made up of four other parties. The Oromo Democratic Party, that's the party that Abiy Ahmed worked his way up through his career. The Amhara Democratic Party, the Southern Ethiopian Democratic Movement, and of course the TPLF. Only one of those parties still exists. So it was consciously made up of those four parties that represented a much larger section of the Ethiopian population than just the TPLF. So Abiy Ahmed worked his way up the Oromo Democratic Party. It is interesting, read on Wikipedia, that he did have to learn the Tigray language, even as an Oromo, to work his way up through that system, which I think should give you an indication that, yes, in fact, the EPRDF was a largely Tigrayan-dominated group. But there were other more pluralistic aspects. So in April of 2018, Ahmed comes to power. He is elected, I believe, not by the Ethiopian people, but within sort of the EPRDF party conference. He is selected, and almost immediately he becomes surprisingly democratic in his instincts. As I said, the EPRDF, this was a party that was, the U.S. liked them, the Chinese liked them. They got richer, they did things well diplomatically, but it was an authoritarian party. Abiy Ahmed opened the prisons. He brought back press freedom. He declared that there would be an election. He made peace with Eritrea. All of this was, I think, probably more than the traditional leadership of the EPRDF was really all that interested in. And certainly the Tigrayan elements of this did not like all of these changes, but I think even they had to recognize that something wasn't working and things needed to be changed, things needed to be improved. I think the point at which the TPLF said, oh, this is definitely gone too far, probably came at the end of 2019. And this is key. I've talked a lot today about how the EPRDF had this really powerful party structure that was key to making this very disparate, disjointed constitution work. And at the end of 2019, Abiy Ahmed dissolved the EPRDF. What he did was he set up a new party called the Prosperity Party that is intended to be a sort of ethnicity-blind, Ethiopia-wide political party. This is incredibly ballsy. I think that's something that I think it's something that on the face of it looks like a good idea, and I think is a morally, philosophically, ethically good idea. Yes, we don't want ethnically based parties. It would be good for Ethiopia if they could have a broad-based political party that isn't rooted in these sort of ethnic-based power stuff. Again, one point, this may be another point where sort of Western folks are like, oh, aren't we superior to this ethnically based politics? Well, allow me to point out that last night in Detroit, in Wayne County, the Wayne County is the larger county in which you find the city of Detroit in Michigan. Two white election officials tried to throw out the votes of like 150,000 African American voters in Detroit. So yeah, we're not as above ethnically based politics in the United States as we like to think. So Abiy Ahmed decided with his Prosperity Party to attempt to make this big leap beyond ethnically based politics for all of Ethiopia, which is, I think a good instinct, like a morally laudable instinct. I don't see how it could possibly work. It just doesn't make sense to me. Like it just seems like it's sort of like trying to turn Ethiopia into Switzerland by force of will. Actually, I bet Switzerland still has ethnically based parties too, to an extent. But it seems difficult to me. It seems like something I've seen in other readings about other countries. It's like, sure, you can have a nominally uh, unifying national party if you've got a dictator, if that's the only way, if moving up that party is the only way that you can get patronage from the guy on top. So it's not something. And I think that's the fundamental problem here. This is why Ethiopia is currently falling. No, Ethiopia is currently falling into civil war because there are incredible tensions, and it's important to emphasize these tensions didn't come about because Abiy Ahmed decided to democratize. These tensions existed before. They will exist after this civil war with whatever system that Ethiopia comes up with next. Whatever system that Ethiopia comes up with next. It is important to, I'm kind of losing track a little bit here. Where was I? Abiy Ahmed, civil war. Yes. So the EPRDF dissolved at the end of 2019. There were the four constituent parties that made up the EPRDF. 3 of them agreed to dissolve themselves and become a part of the Prosperity Party. I think you know which party did not. That was the TPLF, the party that had initially sort of led the formation of the EPRDF and was not interested in just throwing out these ethnic affiliations and its own political base and becoming part of this new Prosperity Party. What's interesting is that the Prosperity Party exists, but now, of course, because the political system is more open, all of these regions in Ethiopia also have their own new ethnically based parties. And the TPLF decided to not do that step and just maintain itself as it was. So throughout 2020, this has been a source of great tension. Oh, Zeno 2011 says thanks and thank you for the super chat. In 2000, the beginning of the end of 2019, Ahmed breaks up the EPRD, starts the Prosperity Party, and throughout 2020, as Ethiopia and the world have also been dealing with some other things like, coronavirus, there has been tension between the TPLF and the central government under Abiy Ahmed. Abiy Ahmed decided that the elections that were supposed to happen in 2020 were no longer going to happen in 2020 because of the coronavirus. That's I don't know if that's a defensible decision or not. Keep in mind that Ethiopia is a country where if coronavirus got out of control, there aren't the health resources to handle it. There just aren't. So it's quite possible that their lockdowns are a lot more serious. I can't speak to whether or not Abiy Ahmed is being sleazy or shady by delaying elections or not. The position of the TPLF is that Abiy Ahmed is definitely being sleazy in delaying these elections. So they just went ahead and had their own elections, which they believe they have the right to do under their constitution, and might be true. Ethiopian central government objected to that, withdrew some funding, started trying to fund other centers of power in Tigray, the home region of the TPLF. And supposedly, according to the Ethiopian government, in early November, one of their central military commands was attacked. I think there's a lot of skepticism about that. This sort of sounds like, well, maybe the Ethiopian central government just wanted an excuse to go deal with the TPLF, and that may have been what happened. So I don't know. But what we do know is that we have a civil war. Ethiopian central government under Abiy Ahmed has invaded Tigray, says that it's made great progress. We don't know. Sort of internet and all communications out of Tigray are shut down. Refugee flows have begun. Refugees have fled to Sudan. I think the current number is something like 27,000. After 2 weeks of fighting, we really don't know much. We do know that the Tigray region is, I think, very difficult. It's very difficult terrain. It's probably fairly easy to hold. It's mountainous. TPLF includes something like the estimates. The current estimate is that they might have 250,000 fighters, which should give you a sense of the scale of the fighting we're dealing with here. I mean, 250,000 people. I've made 3 videos over the past month or so about the conflict between Armenia and Azerbaijan. 250,000, that's a quarter of like Armenia's population. And that is the size of the military force that the Tigrayan, the tiny little Tigrayan province can field. So the Ethiopian army is huge. And things are going to get messy. Ethiopia is a country that has a fairly serious military. They have artillery, they have tanks, they have. I tried to find out how many jets they have, but my understanding is that they are doing aerial bombardment. Unfortunately, this is coming in the context of already elevated ethnic tension. So we're getting the full range of horrific warfare here. We've got military equipment bombing folks. We've got it seems likely that we've got militias on both sides. There was some question in some of the stuff, some of the podcasts I listened to, whether the Ethiopian central government can fully whether they can fully control the military, because the Ethiopian military has, developed in the context of a country where the Tigrayans were the leaders. So there are a lot of Tigrayan folks in the Ethiopian military who might have some loyalty to the TPLF. So yeah, it's gonna get messy. It's scary. But I can't, the New York Times can't tell you what's going on in Tigray right now. Neither can I. But I hope that this has been helpful in giving context. What's interesting about this, something that really strikes me about this is, so this is not well, a few things, sort of 2 final thoughts. This is not some mean, nasty Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed beating up on some long-suffering ethnic minority. This is the folks who used to run the country being pissed off that they no longer run the country and trying to bring back the old system or their old privileges. That does, I think, change your thinking, like the degree to which you might be sympathetic to the Tigrayans. Well, no, it should not change the degree to which everyone should be endlessly sympathetic to the people of Tigray who are being brutalized by the political machinations of the central government and the TPLF. We should always be sympathetic to the individuals suffering for this. But maybe the political leadership of the TPLF is a little less sympathetic when you consider that context. However, I mean, that doesn't matter. A war has started. Violence is occurring. It's important to remember that one of the most horrific things that has, happened on the African continent and the world over the past 30 years is the genocide in Rwanda. And what was the reason the genocide happened in Rwanda? Because the majority Hutu population resented the fact that the Tutsis had been placed above them in both colonial and post-colonial governments. So yeah, like just because, maybe the political leadership of the TPLF sucks, doesn't mean we should be anything but terrified over what's happening right now. So yes, as one of the conclusions, war is bad, and it would be very nice if this stopped. I'm not quite as negative. I think there's an instinct to now all of a sudden decide, oh, Abiy Ahmed sucks. He's the worst. He's betrayed us. I think the Nobel Committee, something that they almost never do, actually came out with, oh, we're very concerned about this, what this guy's doing. He should remember that we gave him the Nobel Peace Prize, which I don't, did they do one of those for Barack Obama after, all the drone war? No, I don't think so. So that's a little screwed up that they think they can lecture an African head of state, not an American one. But I think we should never have lionized Abiy Ahmed to the extent that we did. We should certainly have covered what he had done because it's tremendously interesting. It's a risky but worthwhile and fascinating gamble. I think the appropriate way to look at Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed before November 4th and after November 4th as a tremendously capable guy who is doing very risky stuff, and really to hope that as few people as possible die and that Ethiopia reaches success and peace and prosperity. But I don't think villainizing Abiy Ahmed is yet the appropriate thing to do. This is something that's sort of stuck in my head as a plausible. And I think if there's Ethiopians on the live chat, chime in and tell me whether I'm being fucking crazy here. But my sense is that with his prosperity party, I think that Ahmed was happy to delay elections because my understanding is that there's already even though the Oromo Democratic Party, the Oromo ethnically based party that made up the EPRDF, has dissolved itself, within the Oromo province, there are there are now Oromo parties, multiple Oromo parties developing and taking vote share from the prime minister in his own home province. So my sense is that Ahmed, he wants to do a democratic system because that gives legitimacy and funding and is the right thing to do. That could be a consideration, though rarely a consideration for heads of state. But also, he very much wants to be in charge of that new democratic system, and he wants to win that election. And what I think is kind of a fascinating aspect to this is, he's constantly saying, "Oh, this will be over in a week. This is over shortly. This is over today." Question in my mind, and I think Ethiopians can correct me on this: is this a way for him to build political strength in the run up to the elections? We don't have a new date for the Ethiopian elections, but it's tentatively supposed to be May or June 2021. Remember, I said that the Oromo are 34% of the population, the Amhara are 27% of the population, and the Tigrayans are only 6% of the population. So in a context where Abiy Ahmed is losing, is worried about whether or not he can win an election, does going after the Tigrayans who used to push all of us around, is that a way to win an election? Is that gonna? Because my understanding, I actually did see somewhere someone was talking about how fighting against the Tigrayans is a way to actually unite a larger Oromo Amhara coalition. That's a pretty, I don't know, I think that's pretty freaking sinister, but also maybe that's the kind of sinister Machiavellian thought you need in someone who's going to try to bring Ethiopia to broader success. I don't know. Does that make sense to Ethiopians here? Did anything that I just said make any sense at all to Ethiopians here? Have I made a complete ass of myself? Some white guy in Connecticut trying to explain this extraordinarily fascinating and historically rich country. Anyway, all right, that was just about an hour. We are ready for Q&A. What do we got to say? What do we want to know? Sebastian Moya, with a super chat, thank you, asks, do you think a major Syrian-style refugee crisis from Central America is inevitable as soon as Biden takes office? They just had 2 massive hurricanes. Well, it's not going to be Syrian style. I think it's possible. I would be totally fine with it. um, I uh, I am not someone who believes that the United States is too weak to take in immigrants. I have the history of actual migration history of the United States. In the late 90s and the early aughts, the United States was taking in upwards of 1 million Mexicans and other Central and South Americans every year, illegally, generally. And that's just the illegal ones, probably, and also taking hundreds of thousands of legal, if not a million legal migrants every year as well. So Syrian-style refugee crisis, I don't think we're going to get 5 million folks coming up from Guatemala, El Salvador, Nicaragua, Costa Rica. Nobody comes from Costa Rica because that's a wealthy country. That's not true. Very few come from Costa Rica because it's a middle-income country. But because if you actually add up the population numbers in all of those countries, I think the entire population of all those countries comes to like 25 million or maybe even less. And the United States is a much stronger country than the European Union when it comes to. I mean, we just have a what's a good way to put this very arrogant statement? We're just better at accepting newcomers. We're more confident. We know we have a system that is geared towards newcomers. So yeah, I don't think I would be particularly concerned if we got refugee caravans from Central America. It will be very interesting to see the extent to which the Biden administration holds on to which aspects of Trump's immigration policy. I think there are aspects of it, like streamlining asylum stuff, saying that folks have to wait in other countries, that may be worth preserving, frankly, because like the whole caravan thing, it's, even though it's a tiny fraction, like at the height of these caravan issues, we're talking about 50,000 people. Remember, I said that the United States used to be able to easily take in 1 million illegal migrants every year. Like the idea that 50,000 or 100,000 or even 500,000 of those migrants would be some kind of real challenge is silly to me. And I think people who hold that view are people who think my country is weak. Basically, I just think they're wimps. I think they're cowards. But I do think it would be worthwhile to avoid that political fight. So yeah, it'll be very interesting. I think, yeah, with the hurricanes, there's a real distinct chance of an uptick in migration, and we could use it because Trump has really, really damaged immigration to the United States. Do we have questions? I'm Ethiopian. You are right. Abiy delayed the election because he didn't believe his party could win, using COVID-19 as an excuse. And Imud, do you think that because of that, do you think that this war could actually work for him? Like it could actually jack up Ethiopian patriotism or patriotism for Abiy Ahmed in the Oromo and Amhara populations? Do you think that's a possibility? Okay. Do the Egyptian MX16 asks, do the Egyptians have a hand in this conflict in Ethiopia? I am maybe, I don't know. Honestly, I'm not 100% sure. I did finally, after folks were asking me about it for months, do a little research on the Renaissance Dam and the conflict between Egypt and Ethiopia. Like, I don't think Egypt really has a lot of cards to play here. And it sounds like through negotiation, Ethiopia has built the Renaissance Dam. The key question is the extent, how quickly Ethiopia fills it. If you decided to just fill it this year, then yeah, the Nile would go dry and Egypt would dry up and blow away. That's not going to happen. They're going to do it over a long period of time. Yeah, I don't think it's actually to Egypt's benefit for Ethiopia to be sort of struggling and in a civil war context. They need an Ethiopia that is going to honor its commitments and not fill the dam too quickly. I don't know. And honestly, like what I described in this presentation, talking about the TPLF being angry about losing power over the country, like that strikes me as a lot more plausible than like, what is the sinister hand of Egypt going on here. So yeah, that doesn't make a lot of sense to me. Um, super chat from Eureka Rebellion. Will you do a stream of the upcoming Iran catastrophe? And I don't know. It is a difficult. I don't know what's going to happen with Iran. I need to read up on it. I don't even know like what the legal possibilities are. I mean, the hope is that Biden will be able to jump right back into the agreement. Iran is basically saying like, look, we'll honor the agreement if you honor the agreement and remove these sanctions, and we'll presumably get rid of all the extra nuclear material they have developed. But I don't know. Like it's prickly. Biden is committed to getting back into the deal, but I'm sure that this sort of murderer's row of thuggish warmongers that he's putting in his cabinet will try to trip him up. And I'm 100% sure that every Republican, almost every Republican, and really most Democrats will also try to fuck him up because they all, work for military contractors. So yeah, it's a really concerning thing. But yeah, and I absolutely should research that more. There's so many things I have to research, which I enjoy fully. This is the best job on the planet. But yeah, you're right. I need to lock down Eureka Rebellion. I need to lock down stuff related to Iran. Something I need to do. Ibrahim Ahmed, 20 pounds, says, Somalia here. One of the biggest political issues in the Horn of Africa is between Somalia and Ethiopia over the Somali region. Somalis in Ethiopia want to join Somalia, but Somalia is recovering from civil war. What are your thoughts on this? I think that's fascinating. Generally speaking, I am against revising borders. I don't think if it can possibly be avoided, I want to avoid revising borders. I think a lot about like, okay, what sort of phase of history are we in? Like, what are we? I think that if borders are generally seen as something that does not get screwed with, then people can focus on fixing their own countries and bringing about positive change. And I think the idea and what's one of the scariest and saddest things about our current era, really starting from I guess 2014, when the Russia took back Crimea, is like I'm beginning to see more and more sort of openness to like, oh well, why don't we change this border? Why don't we change that border? Why don't we change this border? And it's a bad thing because there is no quicker route to war than changing borders. And my understanding is that Somalia. I'm embarrassed that I don't have the year, but Somalia and Ethiopia have already fought a pretty ruinous war over the Somali region, and Ethiopia won. Sort of reopening it, I'm not tremendously interested in another problem of that nature. I have to say, unfortunately, Ibrahim, Somalia is another country that I just don't know what's going on there. I would say that I think the fact that Ethiopia, to my understanding, currently occupies areas of Somalia leads me to believe that there really isn't a current Somalian government or entity that could hope to take back parts of Ethiopia. I think that's interesting. I mean, perhaps there are elements within the Somali area of Ethiopia or Somalia itself who would seek to take advantage of this civil war thing in Ethiopia, but I really hope they wouldn't. Honestly, I feel that's. I like borders to stay the way they are, please. So yeah. Questions. I hope that was an adequate answer. Okay. Fadel, I'm sorry, I missed that. If I missed any other super chats, Logo, you want to let me know? I think I got them right. I got that one. I got that one. That one. And Fadel, thoughts on the upcoming Libyan election? There's a Libyan election coming up? Oh, I'm so behind on everything. So yeah, I don't have thoughts on the upcoming Libyan election. I presumably, I did remember there was some uh, there were some intimations of like a deal where there was actually a Libya-wide election. Have they actually put together a commitment to that? Because that would be fantastic. My expectation was that the GNA, the Government of National Accord, which controls most of the places in Libya where people live, Haftar and the House of Representatives government headquartered in sort of Benghazi, Tobruk in the east of the country, controls most of Libya's land, but the Government of National Accord, the UN-approved government, controls most of the people, places where people live. I was sort of, who's having the election? I unfortunately have not been on top of this, and I should be. Every month, I do a sort of patrons-only newscast. It was a little different this month because it was just me agonizing over how wrong I got the U.S. election. I thought that there was going to be an anti-Republican landslide, and while Trump did lose, his party did not. The Democratic Party lost that election, so it was mostly just a therapy session for me. Sort of trying to explain what I got wrong. But normally, I do a sort of item by item discussion of the news from all of the countries that this channel covers, and the fact that I didn't do it for this past month means I'm behind on what's going on in Libya, Fadel, and I apologize for that. But I would love there to be elections in Libya because that'd be sort of a step towards demilitiaizing the country and trying to put together a government with more real legitimacy. So yeah, all I can say is if there are Libyan elections coming, I am eager for them. And I'm sure in the next patrons only newscast, which will be in about 2 weeks' time, I will have more consolidated opinions and ideas about the Libyan election. Sorry for not knowing that. I should know that. Questions. Logo Cool Extreme asks, regarding Mahathir's recent comments on the terrorist attacks in France, how embarrassed should I be, considering I've described him as the best thing that happened to our country? Who was there was someone else on Twitter who was very complimentary of Mahathir, saying like, it was like Peter Zeihan, who's just sort of like, he's probably one of the most important Asian leaders of the 20th century. One of the least heralded and most important. This is the guy who ran Malaysia for quite some time in multiple different historical eras. He was like 95. He said he's one of the most important and unheralded leaders of Asia's 20th century. Also an asshole. That was a good comment. I would not be too embarrassed by a 95-year-old former head of state's slightly cack-handed attempt to reckon with a very difficult situation. Funnily enough, I've got a video coming out on France and Turkey and the treatment of French Muslims and the free speech martyr Samuel Paty. I've got a video on that coming out either tomorrow or Friday, depending on how much energy I have left to work after this presentation. So yes, I will be covering exactly that. Logan Cool Extreme says, well, that's not exactly untrue that Mahathir Mohamad, the very important leader of Malaysia, is both very important and an asshole. So who knows? Maybe one day we'll look at Abiy Ahmed and say, extraordinarily important, transformative leader in Ethiopia and inspiration across the region, and also an asshole. My understanding is that generally speaking, almost all leaders of countries and leaders are assholes. They're sociopaths. It's the idea that you deserve to set yourself up above everyone else and decide what is right and is wrong and to lead and to have the power of life and death. You need to be a little crazy and you need to be a bit of an asshole to do it. We need those assholes, but they're assholes. Anyway, okay. Does Egypt, that's a good question, 50,000 subscribers with no videos challenge. Does Egypt enjoy Ethiopia going to a civil war? I would argue perhaps not. Um, I don't know. Maltemeyer asks, should we bully Orban's corrupt ass more? Man, Malta, I have not spent enough time on the EU lately. I used to do a lot of EU videos, but I just got depressed. Of course, Malta argues that the EU is going to experience a renaissance as a result of COVID, and that seems possible. One of the current issues in EU governance is the fact that Viktor Orban of Hungary, and also to a lesser extent, the Peace Party, I think it's Law and Justice, I think, is what Peace stands for. Another weird acronym. I'd just like to say Peace Party in Poland are basically pushing their systems, their political systems, in directions that the EU government, sort of central government is government the right term? The EU administration in Brussels is not happy with, specifically seen as sort of more hyper-nationalist and more, just more nationalist. Anti-immigrant for sure. Big reason why both of these countries both of these parties in these countries became as powerful as they are in Poland and Hungary is because of the U.S. U.S. policy in Syria and Libya that destroyed those countries and created the refugee crisis that almost destroyed the European Union. I will never resist an opportunity to complain about that. As to whether the degree to which EU should come down on Orban and Poland, I don't know, man. It's hard for me to say. It is exactly, especially as I haven't been reading about it much in the recent months. It's exactly the kind of dispute that we just did a presentation on in Ethiopia. To what extent should regions have more power? To what extent should the central government have more power? And that is obviously something fraught that the European Union needs to decide. I follow some people on Twitter who are like, hey, come on, give Orban a break. Elections have consequences. They're not all going to, end up in places where, everybody goes skipping down the street, holding hands, in the name of neoliberal nationalism or whatever, neoliberal globalism or whatever. Elections should occasionally have surprising results that throw things into question. That's democracy, baby. That's a good thing. So yeah, I don't know. I don't know the extent to which the EU should sort of suck it up, or should attempt to push Poland and Hungary around more. It's a very interesting question that I have not researched. Fognever with a super chat, thank you so much, says both Uganda and Rwanda 90s conflict are extensions of the much larger and longer Congo conflict that have been ongoing since being occupied by Belgium during the 19th century. Yes, that is true to my understanding. It's interesting. So like I'm consciously kind of working my way down places that I don't understand. I'm a little rusty now, but I think I pretty much know U.S. and European history, not backwards and forwards, but I think I'm pretty solid on it for the past 200 years, which I believe is the important history. But I really don't know anywhere near enough about Africa, and that's why I've really enjoyed the past 4 days when I've been researching this Ethiopia stuff. That's why I've got this. Oh man, I can even show you this. Here is my pile of Sudan books, because I really need to read these books. So I'm really enjoying getting to know more about Africa. I think I've done videos, I've read many books on like sort of that first tier of North African countries. And I really look forward to sort of working my way further down. I have not made it to Uganda and Rwanda. I think I have elementary understanding of Ethiopian history and Sudanese history and Egyptian history and sort of, but yeah, when we get below the Sahara, I guess yeah, Sudan does get to below the Sahara in South Sudan. I don't know a damn thing. I'm working my way down. Hopefully, by the time I'm dead, I'll have worked my way into an understanding of the histories of all 54 countries of Africa. I think I'm at like 8, so it'll take some time. So yeah, I cannot speak too much to Uganda, Rwanda. The only thing I really know about the Congo conflict is that it was one of the most horrific wars of the post-Cold War era. This is in the 1990s, and nobody talks about it. My understanding is that there was some real. Oh, there seems to be a barking dog. Um, there are other people in my family who should deal with a barking dog. But the Uganda Rwanda conflict, I don't know enough about it, which is something that I took a very long time to say. Thank you for the super chat, Fog Neighbor. I wish I could say more about Uganda and Rwanda. Ethio Yone says the Oromo Republic of Democratic People coming soon. Do people really want that? It just, I mean, the Oromo are the not the majority, the plurality. They are the largest group in Ethiopia, and they would probably be the people most likely to be capable of having an independent state. But I mean, like it's an awkward, Oromia is a sort of awkward geographical entity, which would not just have all the problems that Ethiopia has with being landlocked, it wouldn't have the weight of, it would be further landlocked, and it wouldn't have the sort of weight of population and power that the Ethiopian government has. It doesn't strike me as a recipe for success, and what it would mean to the rest of I mean, if you take Oromia out of Ethiopia, I don't think there's really an Ethiopia anymore. And what that would mean for just the region, the country, for literally hundreds of millions of people, it seems grim to me. But hey, people are going to do what people are going to do. Maltemeyer says Orban isn't even really nationalist. He's first and foremost corrupt. It's easy for me to take an anti-Hungarian take. My visit to Hungary, Budapest, beautiful city, so much fun, gorgeous, really interesting, historically great. You go to like their national museum, and it's like in 2020, it's like the Treaty of Trianon was a disgrace. We own half of Romania, all of Slovakia, Croatia. It all belongs to us. Grim stuff. So the fact that that could still be a part of sort of the way that Hungary views the world, I don't know. I mean, it's easy for me to believe that some kind of corrupt demagogue could take control in Hungary. Hungary is a country that I worry about in a possible post EU future. So yeah, I don't know. I just don't know. Malta, I have not been reading up on Orban recently. Okay. Questions. Potential history says, imagine Pearl Harboring Eritrea to keep them out of it and having it backfire this bad. I mean, my understanding is that Eritrea is actually working with Abiy Ahmed, the Prime Minister of Ethiopia, against the Tigray, the TPLF. Oh man, I lost my acronyms. The Tigrayan People's Front. That's my understanding. Quite possibly something that I missed. Flash Gordon says, whenever there's trouble in Europe, the Huns are always involved. I'm not sure that's strictly true, but man, I really wouldn't want to be the channel that hates on anybody. But should this be a hating on Hungary channel? That's I think that'd be rude. It's a beautiful, beautiful city, Budapest, beautiful country. Government, kind of sucks. Questions. LPAD DPAD says, what will happen to the oil markets with the second lockdown? I think we're seeing it right now. What's interesting is I think this week or last week, there's a minor oil rally going on. Oil is getting slightly more expensive. But what's interesting for folks on this channel who have been following this channel for a while, who've been following this for a while, what the oil traders and the oil industry and the oil companies consider a rally right now is pretty fucking feeble. Throughout the early aughts and up until 2014 or so, we regularly had oil prices in the 80, 90, $100 a barrel range. Since the beginning of this crisis in March, we haven't really made it. Certainly haven't made it over $50. And now they're super excited that, we're in the low 40s in terms of oil barrel prices. What I think is going to happen with the second lockdown, also Libya, something we discussed a lot on this channel. Libya, the strongman Haftar had invaded the territory of the Government of National Accord. Basically, Turkey's intervention sort of ended that. So Libya, which had stopped its oil production, is coming on full stream again. That's another 1 million barrels a day. If we actually do see a return to the Iran nuclear deal, which would be fantastic, that's another 3 million barrels of oil a day. So I think that the media, certainly the short-term outlook for oil prices is very low. Medium term, actually, I think it could get higher. I've got a video I've been drafting on this. What's really interesting does not affect my prediction that Saudi Arabia will be under a completely different system by 2030. But it is interesting, something I did not fully appreciate, the extent to which national oil companies will survive for longer. There will be something like a Saudi Aramco 50 years from now in Saudi Arabia specifically because of how cheap it is to draw out their oil. But I think what's happening right now, what we're seeing is not the death of quite yet, but really the sort of desolation of the big oil majors, sort of Exxon, Chevron, Shell, Beyond Petroleum, Total. All of the European big major oil companies are making a lot of noise about, now we're turning into green companies, I swear. But the Exxon is just like, fuck it, no, we're going forward. And I think that what we're going to see over the next five years or so is these big major Western oil companies just getting poorer and poorer and drilling for less and less oil. And what that means is that, yeah, we will have a bit of a price rise, but that gets beyond, the impact of the next of this next shutdown, which the effects of which I expect to be negative. So maybe by the end of next year, we'll have, we could conceivably get back into like $50 a barrel of oil, but probably not until then, is my sense. But, I'm not an oil industry analyst. David Garcia, I've got a super chat. Thank you. I'm very grateful. I did not see a question. I will look out for any question from David Garcia. Oh, that's interesting. Potential History says, I heard Tigray fired missiles on Eritrea to try and have them stop letting Ethiopia use airfields in the country, and it just made them commit to the conflict more. Maybe wrong, but that actually sounds quite plausible. Eritrea is a crazy place. I don't know much about Eritrea, but I do know that fucking with Eritrea is a bad idea. That I know. And I do believe I read somewhere that Tigray, the TFLP, did I get that acronym right? Like they did fire on Eritrea, a different country, and that wasn't smart. Eureka Rebellion asks, I'm wondering what your opinion is regarding China and Africa. I am all for it. There's this whole genre of commentary that's like, oh, it's so evil and clearly abusive that China goes all over the world building bridges and stuff. And can that behavior be abusive? Is there a possibility of debt traps and debt trap diplomacy? Sure, of course. Um, the U.S. and the West more broadly does abusive stuff with aid all the time. Are there Chinese projects that are pointless and run up debt for no reason, or are sort of disrespectful of local labor forces by shipping in Chinese companies and workers? Sure, like there are a lot of problems and foibles and questions about Chinese involvement in Africa, just as there is about French involvement in Africa, U.S. involvement in Africa, Turkish involvement in Africa. That's a growing dynamic. I don't know if it's growing now, but it is a long-standing dynamic that perhaps I should do a video on. But like this idea that what China's doing with the Belt and Road is like uniquely sinister. It's like, no, it's actually, I think, generally, when the projects are useful, and I hope that as time goes on, they become more useful. What China's doing is great. It's fantastic that countries in the developing world have a alternative, someone else they can work with, other than the West, where Western aid too often consists of sort of spending paying Ivy League graduates 5 and 6 figure salaries to go and look at problems, whereas the Chinese just go in and build highways and railroads. I think it's good that there's anyway. I am pro China in Africa. The current level of involvement, I'm not super psyched for them to have more naval bases. Like I think they've got a naval base in Djibouti. I'm not excited for military interaction. Just as I'm very opposed to U.S. and French military action in Africa. But I don't think that's really an issue yet with China and Africa. I believe the competition between the United States and China is likely to be one of the main stories of the 21st century. But I think attempting to pathologize aid or economic involvement in developing countries from Africa to Eastern Europe is stupid. I'm not a fan of that. Anyway, so that is what I think. That is my opinion of China and Africa. Local stream asks, why are let's be pleasant. Local stream asks, why are conservatives like our friend James Cook unable to fathom that Trump lost the election? There's a lot of media out there that specializes in lying to people. You could argue all media in some ways. I think there's a lot of people who are invested. It's like, well, the Democrats and the liberals were full of shit on the Russiagate thing, which they absolutely were. That's just the same. No, like what's going on here is what Trump and his people are doing is not the same. It is worse. It is fundamentally attempting to throw out democracy. Is basically what it was. It's a hissy fit. It's really unattractive. It's quite sad, frankly. The standard joke. I certainly didn't say this. People have been. I don't know if you saw this on Twitter. Or it's sort of a standard thing. Is that well, yeah, for the baby boomers were always so worried that video games were going to rot their children's minds, and turns out it was actually cable news that rotted theirs. And I include, despite the fact that I think that the current issue is a real problem. This urge to destroy democracy on the part of some Republicans right now is a real problem. Fox News is the problem, MSNBC is the problem, CNN is the problem. It also could just be an aspect of age in a lot of cases. Who knows? Maybe maybe the baby boomers are right about video games, and we're just going to see the cognitive and insanity-inducing effects when we make our way into our 50s, 60s, 70s. And shit, I'm in my 40s. I could already be losing my mind playing video games, so maybe I'll be okay. Did I miss a super chat? David Garcia, still looking for for a question, David Garcia. Did not. Okay, other questions. James SR 23, at what point are these issues for the United Nations? If not, why not dissolve the United Nations? If you're This is actually a fantastic point that James brings up here. Not that he's bringing up a good point, but that he's highlighting like a real blind spot in the way a lot of people view the United Nations. If you ask like an average sort of right-leaning person in the United States what the United Nations does, they're going to be like, oh, they just make nasty resolutions about Israel, right? That's all they do. Well, actually, the United Nations is already deeply involved in what is happening in Ethiopia. In fact, the United Nations is deeply involved in every conflict in the world. I don't want to overstate that, but yes, they are involved everywhere. They are, the reason why everybody in Syria and everybody in Yemen hasn't starved to death over the past 10 years of conflict is because of humanitarian intervention funded by, to some degree, coordinated by the United Nations. The United Nations is a tremendously useful organization that does peacekeeping in 15 places. 15 places that the United States doesn't have to be. Its humanitarian organizations are feeding people in conflict zones and non-conflict zones all over the planet every single goddamn day. And it is a source of I'm sorry, James, I don't mean to come down on you, but it is a source of extraordinary frustration to me that a lot of people in the United States and the world just sort of assume that the UN, they just sit in New York and bitch about Israel. That is not a millionth of what the United Nations does. Does the United Nations have real deep-seated systemic problems? Absolutely. But they are not what, sort of the dipshits who watch Fox News think they are. So, yeah. Sorry about that. I got a little heated. I am currently in my childhood bedroom dealing with the political opinions of certain family members who may or may not resemble what I was imagining James was thinking. So I apologize, James. I should not be getting, I appreciate all opinions here. James Cook says, what will happen with Venezuela, Mexico, and the Biden administration? That's a really, really interesting question, James Cook, and I need to make some videos. I don't know. The interesting thing is, I think it's very common. I fall into this. A lot of folks on all spectrums of sort of pro-restraint foreign policy, right and left, fall into this like, oh, God damn it, the Democrats aren't an improvement. They're the same fucking things, the Republicans. When it comes to Syria, I'm deathly afraid that that's going to be the case. I think that, the Biden administration could very well be much worse for the Middle East than the Trump administration was. Entirely possible that we could be in a war in Syria in 3 months' time. I don't know. It's possible. Not saying it's likely, but it's possible. Will they, get back into the Iran deal as they absolutely should? I don't know. I'm not confident. Maybe, who knows? When it comes to Latin America, however, I do think the Democrats actually do have a much better approach. I think that's not true. The Middle East is a unique problem because of just what a useful proving ground it is for U.S. defense industry interests. But Latin America, I think there's enough of a consensus in sort of U.S. business community, elite community, whatever community, that like actually it's better when Latin America is buying and selling things from us, and actually it really sucks when we're trying to overthrow governments and creating genocides and participating in the nightmare. And the Trump administration was kind of a weird throwback. I don't know if it was conscious, but for basically we had a almost 2-decade period where the United States just sort of didn't, mostly because of the war on terror, and then I think because of legitimate efforts and concerns of the Obama administration, we just didn't do as much fucking around in Latin America. And I hope, and I don't see why not, why it shouldn't be the case that the Biden administration sort of returns to that sort of like let Latin America do what Latin America does. If it wants to have a dumbass socialist government like Venezuela that sabotages itself, let it do that. We don't need to pile on, because the Trump administration's piling on to the Venezuelan regime actually made it look heroic, actually made it look like the good guys, to anybody in the world who thinks, even after the Venezuelan regime had like dramatically fucked up Venezuela. So it's just better if the U.S. just doesn't do all the bullshit that they tend to do. And I think there's a distinct chance that the Biden administration will get back to that. And if the Biden administration does get back to that, then I think then the Maduro will fall fairly quickly, honestly. But Ahmed CI asks, why is India being left out of the Asian trading alliance blocks? I think you're probably referring to the, I don't know, what is it, the RCEP? Or is that what there was an agreement signed by China and basically everybody who was in the TPP, except the United States. And was India in the TPP? Maybe not. I don't think so. Anyway, so India was being left out of the Asian Trading Alliance blocks because that was a China-sponsored thing, and India is not going to jump into China-sponsored agreements. I'm smiling when I say that because that's a good thing for me from the United States. As critical as I am of U.S. foreign policy, I do want my country to come out on top in a competition with China. And the fact that at this point, we haven't fucked up things badly enough to get to a point where we can't rely on India makes me happy. So India is, so that's the issue with that China-led bloc. I'm pretty sure India was not a potential signatory of the TPP. That's because India is a very big country with a lot of a deep history of laws that, oh, there was a super chat. Thank you. With a deep history of laws that are very distinct. A lot of these trading organizations, trade agreements, they've gone long beyond, sorry. These trading agreements are not just about tariffs anymore. And even with India, tariffs are politically fraught. They make sweeping changes. They demand sweeping changes from the local governments that sign on to them. Which, and of course, the United States writes a lot of these trade agreements, so we're okay. We're basically saying you have to follow these laws that we already follow. And India has a long history of being non-aligned. It has a long history of socialism. It has a long history of its own democratically enforced or created laws. So India is not so eager to sign on to these things that sort of dictate terms to them in ways that say, much smaller countries like Australia are eager to do because they feel the need to align themselves. India, whether or not it's actually true at this point, I think rightly believes itself to be a country that should be setting up its own sort of trade regimes and power blocks, and is less eager to sort of pile into US or China-led blocks. I think its growing antagonism with China will make it more likely to jump into US-led blocks, but I think it'll jump in with certainly more power than other developing countries, which could have positive impacts on US-led trade regimes. So I don't know. Here's hoping. Eureka Rebellion says, I am no fan of Trump, but how much do you think he will be remembered fondly compared to Bush and Obama? I think Trump is very quickly, it depends how quick, I think 10, 15 years from now, hopefully, 15 years from now, I think we'll have two parties that are called the Democrats and the Republicans that represent completely different things from what the Democrats and the Republicans represented certainly 5 years ago, and also from what they represent today. And hopefully we'll have, just a better system all around. There's a lot of thinking that I'm not sure I really agree with about, there's institutional cycles and diplomatic cycles. And in the 2020s, the United States is at a unique conjunction of the institutional and economic cycles that will lead to chaos. Shit sounds like astrology to me, but I think and I'm not a fan of astrology. Yes, I'm talking about what's his fucking name, George Friedman, formerly of Stratfor, who wrote a really terrible book that I forced myself to read on this theory. Anyway, I think that's largely bullshit, but I think it's undeniable that we are just by virtue of the fact that Trump became president, we are in a period of intense flux, and I think that eventually things will sort of settle down. And provided Trump manages to be a one-term president, he'll be looked back at as kind of hilarious, and may actually be one of the only things we remember about my adulthood. It is kind of interesting just sort of looking back and being like, you know what, like the whole period of time from the 90s to the 2020s or 2030s maybe looked at as like the great missed opportunity, the dumbest era in US politics. And if you're looking for a guy who really represents the dumbest era in US politics, then Donald Trump may be the one. So yeah, I think he'll be remembered like, like a reality TV star was the president. It's kind of like, how Taft was the fat guy who was president. I think he'll might in fact be remembered more than Bush and Obama, just because he's so pitifully representative of our current era. That's a very negative interpretation, but that's my. And yeah, Bush has been pretty disastrous. That's for goddamn sure. But I think we might actually be overestimating the degree to which bad presidents get a historical representation. He may. U.S. history is getting long. It's at a certain point. We're 46th president now. It gets hard to keep all these eras in your mind, and I feel like this is probably one of those eras that the United States is going to be perfectly happy to forget. I mean, provided we survive it. So. Questions. JG says, do you think being too intelligent of a person produces diminishing returns when you try to be president? I think that is a fascinating theory that I've had a suspicion of that for quite some time. Woodrow Wilson was, by all accounts, brilliant. He was the president of Princeton University, I think, before he was president. And yeah, I think he's one of the more nightmarishly failed presidents of all the presidents of U.S. history. So yeah, being too smart. There is such a thing as being too smart to be president, but you can also be too dumb. And I think we've sort of seen that with Trump, and we've seen that with I don't know. Yeah, probably saw that with Bush to a degree as well. So. Yeah, but yeah, I think it's very true that you can be too smart to be president. Sterling Archer says, I bet Trump will be remembered the same way as H.W. Bush or Woodrow Wilson. I don't think that. No, I don't think so. I don't think so. I don't think Trump has. I think there are a lot of people are invested in claiming that Trump has like broken some kind of bold new ground. I just don't. I don't think it's true. I don't think any of that really passes the sniff test. And H.W. Bush was, I think, still remembered as one of our more competent presidents, actually. Did I miss the super chat? What did I do? Where did I miss the super chat? Eureka Rebellion. I am no fit. No, I did that one. Where did I miss the? Someone said I missed a super chat. I've missed 2 super chats. Shit. Where? Eureka Rebellion. I did that. I'm no fan of Trump, especially Bush and Obama. Oh, God. Okay. Whew, thanks. Ibrahim Ahmed says there should be a world government one day soon. I don't know about soon. I like the idea of a Star Trek future, but I think it's going to take a couple centuries for sure. Yeah, this idea that we're just going to pop up one day and there's going to be a world government. No, I don't think that's going to happen. Yeah, that doesn't make a ton of sense to me. I think what there should be is, I mean, honestly, I think the European Union, despite some really big fucking mistakes, like the unified currency, I think is kind of a model. I mean, it's absolutely. The United Nations should slowly evolve into something that is more has more legitimacy and more power. I think I think what needs to happen for that to happen is I think the United States needs to wake up to something that it knew very well during the Cold War era, which is that the United Nations is actually a tool and a defense for all people, not just an obstacle when the hegemon wants to do shit. And I think since the end of real competition for the United States, it hasn't been particularly good for the United Nations over the past 30 years, where the United States is, unequivocally the most powerful country in the world, possibly the only country that can exert itself in certain ways. I think as hopefully as the world gets richer, I'm seeing some really troubling indications that COVID has been really much more horrific for emerging economies than it has been for developed economies. As the world continues to get richer and the U.S. stops being quite so infinitely all powerful. That sounds like an overstatement, but the United States is extraordinarily powerful. I think as that diminishes, I think the United States will hopefully return to sort of pouring some of its legitimacy and power into institutions like the United Nations that actually can keep everybody safe and represented. I think that yes, there should be a world government someday. I don't think soon. I don't think unless there's some extraordinary advances on life extension, and I do pay some attention to that realm, and I don't see them. I don't think it'll be in my lifetime. But there are a lot of 20 somethings on this live chat now. I think maybe in your lifetime, especially if you don't eat too much and take your supplements. Yeah, I don't know about there being a world government. Why do right wingers hate globalism? Is a fantastic question, File. Also, like, I think that my problem with the question, why I don't quite follow, is like, so what's a what's a right winger? It's in the United States, right wingers traditionally, not now, not under the current president, are traditionally folks who are into devolved power and sort of libertarianism and being against the power of Washington, D.C. So obviously that translates into, if you're someone in Texas or upstate New York who is worried about the power of the U.S. federal government, well, then you're going to be even more worried about the power of a one world government. What, like the folks in Ethiopia and Malaysia are going to tell me, how I can buy my guns and knock up my cousin? Like I don't know, whatever. That's reductive and insulting. I apologize. Yeah, so that's sort of a traditional thing. Also, I mean, like, there's also the aspect where traditionally sort of right leaning parties and are a little more wrapped up with business. I mean, that's not always the case. Businesses can fear, global action on climate change or environmentalism, or it's a very broad question, Fadil. And I'm not sure I'm doing a good job of answering it. There you are. Eureka Rebellion says, I know I got that one already, but I think Eureka Rebellion, thank you for all these super chats. You've been very generous. A world government with an understanding of the Enlightenment would be great. The Enlightenment. I too am a huge fan of the Enlightenment. I think there's people who argue. It's funny because I absolutely adore Steven Pinker's book, Better Angels of Our Nature, or something like that. It's pretty formative for me. I think it's a fantastic. He basically talks about how violence writ large is actually declining across the world. It's a fantastic thing. But he apparently wrote a book recently called Enlightenment Now that has gotten a lot of critiques, saying that it's not entirely clear that Stephen Binger understands what the Enlightenment is. And while I have not read the book, I have read these critiques and they make sense to me. I mean, um, the Enlightenment is like really all encompassing when you talk about um, Western thought, modern thought, world thought. I mean, it's like Locke, Rousseau, Montesquieu, uh, Kant. I mean, these thinkers are so influential. It's the water we drink, the air we breathe, everything we've discussed over these past 2 hours has got something to do with the Enlightenment. But the idea that like a certain thing is the Enlightenment or represents the Enlightenment, like um, Hitler was a result of the Enlightenment, maybe a reaction to, but Stalin, communism, conservatism, socialism, environmentalism, and like all of this. It's like the Enlightenment is sort of like an intellectual tradition, and it's hard for me to see much in modern politics that isn't like of the Enlightenment. So I don't know, like I don't know if I'm making much sense, Eureka Rebellion, but I'm attempting to complicate the sentiment provided there, because I don't know that I have an understanding of the Enlightenment. I don't know that anybody does. But it's like an intellectual framework that we're all swimming in. I don't know if that makes sense. Local Cool Extreme asks, would you accept the TPP if it included India and Indonesia to make it TIP, the Trans-Indo-Pacific Partnership? I don't know, man. The TPP is something that I've had a lot of objections to. What I want is I want the fucking World Trade Organization to do what the World Trade Organization was always supposed to do. The World Trade Organization was set up in the 90s. And the thing was, we got almost everybody in the world to sign up to the World Trade Organization on the understanding that, like, if they accepted a whole bunch of US and other Western goods and ideas about intellectual property and approaches to things, if they accepted that, then they'd be able to join this negotiation process where the US and Europe and Japan started giving up some things, like maybe on agricultural policy or things that were much more important to these developing countries that sacrificed so much to join the World Trade Organization. And then we never fucking did that. It's common in like the Wall Street Journal or the Economist to complain about the failures of the Doha round of the World Trade Organization because none of these developing countries are willing to give up all of the things that we promised them. What the hell? And they're not willing to give us more stuff after we failed to give them what they wanted. So I mean, fundamentally, the TPP is about the TPP, and on the Atlantic one, which is TTIP, I think is what it's called. Fundamentally, those trade agreements are about after we've made the entire world sacrifice to join one big club called the WTO, on the understanding that we're all going to be in this big club now. TTIP and the TPP are smaller clubs with better rules that keep out the WTO, which pisses me off. In the context of heightened competition between the United States and China, I'm not honestly sure whether I'm willing to like suck it up and do the TPP. Thankfully, I don't have to make that decision. But I am very set in my ways. I don't really like changing my opinions of things. Maybe that opinion of the TPP that I've had for quite some time, maybe it's time to abandon that. But I don't know. Hamza Khan asks, do you see a big US-EU trade deal coming under Biden? It's already written. It's called the TTIP. And that's like the shit. I can't. So yeah, that's a distinct possibility. The thing is, what's really complicated things is Brexit. So a big deal between the US, EU, and Britain, like I think that's the TTIP was developed in a world where Brexit was in the EU and the U.S. could negotiate with the EU. I don't know. And honestly, like maybe that's a way for Britain to try and muscle its way back into European financial stuff. So yeah, I don't know, Hamza. I don't know. Hmm. In the near future, I think Egypt will attack Ethiopia in the near future. What do you think? David Garcia asked, in the near future, I think Egypt will attack um, 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 will attack Ethiopia. I would be surprised if Egypt attacked Ethiopia. I think that would be rather complicated. But I mean, I don't know. Maybe if Abiy Ahmed like becomes some kind of pariah, maybe if the civil war goes really terribly, like honestly, I would think Somalia would attack before Egypt did. Maybe I just don't have enough respect for Sisi's regime and the power of the Egyptian military. But yeah, I don't want to buy it. Logo says I missed a super chat from Fog Neighbor. I apologize. I will find it. Shit, I'm no fan of Trump. Where? Fog Neighbor, I believe that Trump legitimately lost, but one also has to acknowledge that the ballot process and MSM's coverage of it were handled way too poorly. Elections in the United States are complicated. I think what the mainstream media does not acknowledge is the extent to which elections are pretty fucked. And absolutely, there are democratic elements that are invested in keeping elections fucked. Um, they are not fucked to the extent that they are widespread, they are fraudulent in widespread ways, but they are fucked to the extent that it's a team effort. It's a bipartisan thing. There are certain things that the Democrats want that would make elections much easier to participate in. There are certain things that the Republicans want that would make um, uh, a process that is already not, I mean, already very light on fraud, like absolutely foolproof against fraud, which would be worth doing. But the Democrats aren't willing to concede on making things foolproof because it makes it harder to vote. And the Republicans aren't willing to concede on making things easier to vote because they think that that means they lose, which is interesting because that's not the case. This election had extraordinary turnout. Republicans traditionally have, so it's not like the Democrats are, the unique evil here. The Republicans have traditionally made it really, really hard, have been invested in just making it hard to vote at all, whereas the Democrats have been invested in not making voting super secure, because by making it super secure, you make it harder to vote. Because both parties have traditionally believed that if turnout goes up, Democrats automatically win. This election, another aspect of this past November 3rd election, is that that's not the case at all. And it was stunning. I think 150 million people are likely to have voted. That's up by, I mean, Jesus, I think that's up by 40 million people in the United States. That is an extraordinarily high level of participation. And Trump, thankfully, because he is widely disliked, lost. But the Republicans won at every other level. They won state elections. They won. They didn't quite take back the majority in the House of Representatives, but they got real close. And it seems likely that they're going to win likely that they'll retain their majority of the Senate. The Republicans, in the heaviest turnout election in 120 years, at least, possibly more, the Republicans dominated. So this old thing that both the Democrats and the Republicans have always believed, that Republicans can't compete in high turnout elections, is gone. So maybe there's space for finally each of the two parties conceding. Like maybe we could, oh, I don't know, make election day a holiday so everybody can vote. And then maybe we can implement the best practices for mail voting in every state in the union. I don't think we need a national voting system. I think that there needs to be more attention towards improving the voting system is in every state. I believe in federalism. I think that's important. But like maybe there is, now that the Republicans know that they can win high turnout elections, maybe there's finally a possibility of nationwide legislation to both make voting easier and make it more secure. So yeah, like I think Fogg-Niebuhr is absolutely right in pointing out that like yeah, like the way that CNN and the New York Times talk about voting, like I think they're right in that there is no like massive fraud the way that Republicans talk about it. But like if you're going to come on here and say that like there are no problems with U.S. voting, you're fucking nuts. New York, like we're 2 weeks later, 2 weeks later now. New York and California, places that have been two solidly blue states, so they've had no incentive to improve things for fucking 20 years. California and New York are still counting their votes 2 weeks later. That's insane. Yeah, they're big states, but they are rich places. People who've been trying to vote in, I mean, these are leftist, Brooklyn socialists who've been trying to vote in New York elections for like state stuff, or it's just like, it's the worst. It is worse. Well, I mean, Deep South, Georgia has actually distinguished itself as having fairly fair and principled elections this election. And New York, the home of Democratic left wing, is the most fucked up election process in the country. So yeah, Fogg-Niebuhr is absolutely pointing correctly to hypocrisy in sort of the mainstream media. However, that does not mean that what Trump's behavior, the behavior of Republican politicians around this election, is at all acceptable. There's a certain, just one last thing, there is a certain amount of sort of inefficiency and horseshit that is naturally a part of voting. I think like this idea of electronic voting machines is fucking, everywhere. It's fucking a terrible idea. It should be something where there's, weird local boards who can become, the lead character on Twitter, which you never want to do, as some Republican racists did last night. I think that's important. That's a vital part of our democracy. But yeah, absolutely, things could really stand to be done better. We need like a national holiday when everyone can go vote. We need best practices to go from state to state for sure. So Fogg-Niebuhr is absolutely right about that. All right, we are at 2 hours, so I'm going to start doing my closing spiel, but you can keep me talking if you do super chats. Man, I am desperate. I am in my childhood bedroom, and I would like to go live in my own apartment next month. So I would love it if you folks would super chat more, which will prolong the stream. I think probably I'm going to look for a nice cheap sublet for a month or two in New York next month. So if any of you know anybody, or maybe someone who needs house sitting, let me know. Not in the chat. Super chats. Who's got super chats? It's funny. My local cool stream just asks, which frozen conflict keeps you up at night and dread the most? Honestly, it used to be Nagorno-Karabakh, which has been resolved, not in the worst way possible, actually. It's been pretty horrific, but could have been worse. Right now, it's probably the Morocco, Western Sahara. That's a real thing that I don't like at all. All right. My name is Robert Morris. Thank you so much for participating in this chat. The More Freedom Foundation is all of you. I wouldn't be able to do any of this without the support of patrons, folks who do super chats, but also just folks who participate, comment on videos, like videos, just show up. I would not be able to do it without you. If you want to, participate in this conversation all month long, you can follow me on Twitter at RoboLaw. I have started doing more Instagram stories. It's mostly just, promoting the videos and hopefully clever ways at my Instagram account at the Golden Age. Yeah, my branding is not consistent, but yeah, Twitter at Rabo Law, Instagram at the Golden Age. I do have a website, www.morefreedomfoundation.com. I'd love it actually. If you haven't liked my Facebook page, I've got a link to it on the about page of the channel. Could you like my Facebook page? I was thinking I should have more Facebook likes. Gosh darn it. Yeah, I have written 2 books. Well, I've written a number of essays and 1 book for sure. This is Avoiding the British Empire. This is my editing copy, which I've marked this way. And basically, it describes the way the US government is making the same mistakes that the British Empire did, and how we could possibly avoid it. It also sort of doubles as like a history of the world for the past 200 years. It's sort of, I'm very proud of it. I think more people should read it. And if you have purchased and read it, I'd be very grateful if you left a review on Amazon. This is available in paperback form and in Amazon ebook form as well. I also wrote a book called Everybody's Lying About Islam, which is about the US-Saudi relationship that is at the heart of terrorism. Sort of terrorism as we see it. I think a phenomenon that's kind of passing away. See tomorrow's video on that, and some other essays as well. I mostly eat because of Patreon. There's a link if you'd like to sign up for my crowdfunding thing. In the next month, we are going to be doing, well, I guess over the next 2 months, what's going to be happening is folks who contribute $2 or more per video are going to be able to vote on what my next topic is. And now, I don't mean like my next topic for a video, but like what my next like massive project is going to be. Like, what am I going to spend the next 2 years of my life diving in on? I've got about 3 potential projects that folks are going to be able to vote on. And you can only vote if you are a patron who gives over $2 a video. You can still sign up for Patreon at $1 a video, and I'm super grateful for that. But I think Patreon is less happy about those. If you sign up for that, you get access to my patron-only news briefs. That's just $1 a video. That's fine. And you get another one of these every month that actually goes item by item through the relevant news items of the countries that this channel tends to cover. So that's another very fun thing that you can do if you sign up on Patreon. But to vote on what my next big project is, you got to be at the $2 level on Patreon. All right, so I think that is all of my spieling. Have we got any last? I do also have a TikTok, which is not great. Anyway, oh, okay, super chat. Woo-hoo. Still going. What is your opinion of left-wing warmongering? I was 7 during the Iraq invasion and never expected the left to be the current warmongers. I think I'm sorry to keep taking issue with your definitions, but I don't see a lot of left warmongering. I see a lot of Democrat warmongering. There's a lot of terms that are used, I think, in U.S. politics. Left or for the Republicans, I guess it's where you stand on the spectrum. From like the Republican perspective, well, communists, socialists, leftists, liberals, and Democrats, they're all the exact same thing. Now, from the Democrat perspective, there's Republicans over here, and then there's progressives over here, and leftists over there, and socialists and communists over there. So leftists, they're like, of the there's 218, so 270 Democratic politicians at the congressional or presidential level. I think you could fairly describe, of that 270, I think you could fairly describe maybe 20 of them as actual leftists, maybe 25. The vast majority, and of those leftists in the Democratic Party, thinking of Ro Khanna, probably. I'm not 100% sure, actually. He's sort of Silicon Valley's representative. But I think he does, yeah. Ro Khanna, Ilhan Omar, AOC, Um, is it Pramaja? I cannot pronounce her name, and I'm sorry for that. As an Indian American woman, I believe she's a real leftist. Barbara Lee, of course, the only heroic member of Congress, the woman who stood up against the authorization for the use of military force after 9/11. Barbara Lee, really the only living American hero, as far as I'm concerned. Like these are real leftists, and of those real leftists that I just mentioned, that are literally like 20% of the real leftists um, uh, if not more, of the real leftists in the U.S. Congress. All of them are opposed to war. All of them are opposed to the military-industrial complex. That's not something that they're interested in. The Democratic Party, man, they've always been like, unfortunately, yeah, Joe Biden totally voted for the war in Iraq. Democrats are, most Democrats are like more polite Republicans, especially in the era of Reagan. I did a video called um, Ronald Reagan versus the Joker at the beginning of this year that sort of lays out like what I think about U.S. politics. I wish more people would watch that video because I think it's one of the better videos I've done this year. Like most Democrats are just kind of like light Republicans, and Democrats have traditionally had the same incentives as any other congressperson. They want defense contractors to give them money and give them jobs. So it's not that surprising, really, that Democrats are supportive of war. Hillary Clinton, Joe Biden, John Kerry, pretty much all the prestigious Democrats that you can think of who were, senators, and most of the ones who were representatives in 2003. There's been a lot of turnover since then. It has been 17 years, but yeah, they were all Iraq War supporters. Um, and what's interesting is that um, yeah, they were all Iraq War supporters. Obama destroyed Libya. He destroyed Syria. The excuses are usually nicer than the excuses that Republicans use. But yeah, I mean, fundamentally, we are a warlike people, and that's stuff that we do. Fadel asks thoughts on the anarchists in Rojava. I have not checked in on Rojava recently. The sort of Syrian Kurdish region. I'm I don't know. I've never been as in love with the concept of Rojava as many of my friends have been, many journalists I know have been. Because at the end of the day, I'm not a huge fan of the Turkish and U.S. Get Assad project, and I think that as inspiring as the female fighters of the SDF can be, and as inspiring as the forms of government they've set up there are to folks. It just doesn't really get. It doesn't really change my impression that it's this militia that we invaded a country and set up. I'm not really a fan of. And yeah, we didn't technically invade Syria, but we absolutely did everything we could to create a large ungoverned region and destabilize the place, which led to the rise of the Islamic State, of course. So yeah, I'm not. Uh, but I completely acknowledge that there are attractive and interesting things being done by the Syrians, the Kurds of northern Syria. But I have trouble seeing beyond the sort of geopolitical obstacles they set up to peace in the region to get excited about that. I think there's a real, there's no question in my mind that a lot of that is sort of consciously created for Western media consumption. I don't doubt that there's very real commitments to socialism or anarchism or whatever among the SDF, YPG, whatever. I also know that they consciously sort of primp it up to appeal to impressionable young Western journalists. Okay. That's interesting. Potential history says, I've not understood holding voting for the Iraq war against people as they were lied to, just like the public. Plenty to criticize them for, but hey, they voted for Iraq. Such an empty thing for me. You know, the thing is, though, hundreds of thousands of people opposed Iraq at the time. Interestingly, I did not. I was a big supporter of the Iraq war as a 23-year-old. And I think part of the reason I decided to do all this with my life was incredible regret over that. But you know what? I wasn't a senator. I wasn't responsible for that decision. And if I was, I don't think people should have listened to what I had to say going forward without an apology. All right, last chance. Any super chatting? I think it's cool. 2 hours and 15 minutes is great. Thank you all so much for being here. I'd be very grateful if some of you considered signing up for my crowdfunding thing. But the fact that you're here alone is fantastic, and I'm tremendously grateful. There's a Kenobi question. Do you agree that Western Sahara should be under the rule of Morocco? Are you with the freedom of self-determination? Honestly, I don't care. Which I'm sure is unsatisfying. I think that Morocco has settled the place. It's hard for me to see how Morocco could be dislodged at this point. I think the Sahrawi people have, legitimate grievance there, but I don't see anything happening. What I'm far more interested in than what happens to this sort of stretch of desert inhabited by 500,000 people. I'm far more interested in what happens in relations between Morocco and Algeria. And Algeria, of course, backs the SADR, the entity that wants, and it's hard to see how they can kick Morocco out of Western Sahara. And the thing that bugs me the most is that these two countries of tens of millions of people, brilliant, people with really interesting countries and resources, are, fighting with each other largely over this fucking stretch of desert, and in the process, making both Morocco and Algeria more vulnerable to European imperialism, U.S. imperialism, French imperialism, Chinese imperialism. It just strikes me as one of the dumbest conflicts in the world, and it makes me sad. So, anyway, all right. Okay, I think there are no more super chats, and I have pitched away, and I'm very grateful. And it's we don't want it to go for 2.5 hours. Thank you so much. Yes, I'm sure I went on the stream. Huzzah.